In August of 2015, a woman was home alone when she received a very disturbing text message from her daughter, who lived in Houston, Texas. It read that she was being held hostage by a former boyfriend. Time truly was of the essence, but the response of the sheriff's department would lead to a plethora of questions and criticisms. It was around 10:15 a.m. on the 8th of August 2015 when Barbara Yansky received a text message from her 40-year-old daughter, Valerie Jackson. It simply read, 911, 911, 911, 911. 4 minutes later, Barbara received another text message from Valerie, which read, he has phone and will ring. DVD has gun. Barbara took this message to mean that Valerie was being held gunpoint at her home by her ex-boyfriend, 48-year-old David Conley. Valerie's mother, Barbara, lived in another state, but as soon as she received that text message, she did what any mother would do. She immediately called police and requested them to conduct a welfare check on Valerie and her family.
It hurts my heart as a parent, not my child reaching out for help, and I'm helpless to help them.
The Jackson family consisted of 50-year-old Dwayne Jackson and his 40-year-old wife, Valerie, and their children, 10-year-old Honesty, 10-year-old Dwayne, 11-year-old Caleb, 7-year-old Trinity, and 6-year-old Jonah. Valerie's 13-year-old son, Nathaniel, from a prior relationship, also lived at the home. At 10:49 a.m., Harris County Sheriff's Office responded to Valerie's home on Falling Road in Houston. They approached the front door and knocked. Nobody answered. They alerted to their presence, but once again, nobody came to the front door. They could hear somebody inside turn a lock on the front door. They stood on the porch for several minutes, but nothing appeared to be amiss. They contacted Valerie's mother and asked what kind of car Conley drove. She described the car, and they informed her that it wasn't there. After hanging up with Valerie's mother, the officers left the home. As one source stated, they just didn't have enough to go inside. They made a decision. At 11:57 a.m., Valerie texted her mother once more. It was spelled incorrectly, but she was able to determine that the text message read, they knock, left. 15 minutes later, Barbara was informed by the sheriff's office that they'd gone to Valerie's home, but nobody responded. They did not have probable cause to enter. Barbara called up Valerie's ex-boyfriend, Conley. He said that he was across town and that he had no idea where Valerie was. The officers responded to the scene again at 4:43 p.m., followed by again at 6:10 p.m., and then once more at 7:51 p.m. These welfare checks were triggered by Valerie's mother calling 911 again, followed by Valerie's brother, Earl Yansky, who was in Montana, and Valerie's sister, who was in Chicago. Valerie had been sending out numerous messages for help. Sometime later, officers learned that Conley had an arrest warrant for allegations that he had smashed Valerie's head against a refrigerator back in July. It quickly dawned on them just how serious this situation may have been. They returned to the Jackson family home and set up a perimeter around the home. They then called the Sheriff's Office High Risk Operations Unit, which is similar to a SWAT team. As they waited for them to arrive, the officers who had set up a perimeter peered into the windows to see if they could see any movement from inside the home. It was now dark, and they were armed with their flashlights. As Deputy William Reed illuminated one of the rooms with his flashlight, he saw a comforter wrapped up on a bed. He stated, I saw a child's head with a gunshot wound. Blood pooled on the bed. I could see a child's head. Now we have life in danger. We have to go into the house. Time was truly of the essence, and the officers didn't have enough time to wait for the Sheriff's Office High-Risk Operations Unit. Officers approached the front door and began to kick it in, fearing what they could find inside. As soon as the door blasted open, the distinct sound of gunfire erupted from inside the home. The officers retreated from the home and waited for the arrival of the unit and a negotiator. They arrived at the scene within minutes, set up a perimeter, and began negotiations. They had established that Conley was inside the home, and he was armed. A standoff ensued which lasted almost 2 hours. During these 2 hours, Conley was called by Valerie's brother. He asked him what was going on and where Valerie and the children were. Conley chillingly replied that he had killed them all. Eventually, Conley came outside and he surrendered. With Conley in handcuffs, the officers conducted a sweep of Valerie's home. What they found inside would traumatize even the most seasoned investigators. They entered the first bedroom. They immediately noticed that blood was splattered across the walls. The bodies of 4 of the children were found inside this bedroom. Their wrists were all handcuffed to the bed frame of their bunk beds. They had all been shot dead. Near their bodies, investigators found half-eaten sandwiches. They proceeded through the rest of the home. In the bathroom, they found the bodies of the other 2 children. Blood was splashed across the white walls and bathtub. Inside the master bedroom, investigators found the lifeless body of Valerie. She was lying in a contorted position on the bed. Her wrists were handcuffed to the footboard, and she had been shot a total of 6 times. It was observed that there was blood on the bottom of her foot, indicating that Valerie had maybe been forced to watch her children be killed before she was forced into the bedroom, where she too lost her life. Dwayne's body was also found in the master bedroom. He was on the floor with his body covered by a blanket. His ankles were handcuffed, and he had been shot a total of 14 times. On the kitchen table, investigators found a 9mm handgun, along with an empty box of 50 bullets. Throughout the home, they found 34 shell casings, along with handcuff keys and 4 rolls of duct tape. It was evident that this was a premeditated murder, and Conley had come to the home equipped with the ominous items, knowing full well that nobody would be leaving that home alive. Neighbours gathered outside to try and figure out what was taking place. The home was quickly cordoned off, with crime scene tape, as forensic experts were called in. There was nothing that could be done for the family, and they were all pronounced dead at the scene. Neighbours watched on in horror as 8 bodies were removed from the home in body bags. One neighbour, Adela Ramirez, said, "I cannot believe it. I am in horrific shock." In announcing the arrest of Conley, Chief Deputy Tim Cannon said, "We cannot fully comprehend the motivation of an individual that would take the lives of so many innocent people, especially the lives of young ones." He further commented, "We're here with our brothers in arms standing behind us because we're all hurting. It's a difficult day for us at the Sheriff's Office. Once again, a tragedy has struck our city. Our hearts go out to those affected by this tragedy." Conley was charged with 3 counts of capital murder. One count of capital murder covered multiple deaths, and another one was for Jonah, because he was just 6 years old. Valerie and David Conley met back in 1999 through a phone dating service. Conley had just finished serving time in prison for unauthorised use of a motor vehicle. When Valerie entered into a relationship with Conley, she was unaware of his violent nature. See, Conley had an estranged wife, Vanessa Conley. The couple were married when Vanessa was just 19 years old. She commented to my Fox Houston, "He was very charming, nice at the time. He was so nice, called me every day." However, around a month into their marriage, Conley completely changed. Vanessa said that one day she didn't do the laundry appropriately and didn't clean to Conley's standard. He responded by shoving her into the bathtub and beating her. The relationship between Valerie and Conley was very much the same. Around a year into the relationship, Conley and Valerie had their first child together, a daughter they named Natalie. Shortly after she was born, Conley was arrested and charged with domestic violence after he shoved Vanessa onto a bed and straddled her with a knife to her throat. Conley shouted that he wasn't going to go back to prison because of Valerie. This attack had come after Valerie had filed an assault charge against him for cutting her with a knife, punching her in the face, and wrapping a cord around Natalie's neck. Valerie later recanted, but the prosecutor pursued the case anyway, and in 2002 Conley was sentenced to 5 years in prison for retaliation. Upon his release, Conley and Valerie continued their relationship. By now, Natalie had been sent to live with her grandmother out of state. Barbara would become Natalie's legal guardian, but the couple had another child, a little boy they named Nathaniel. He was among the victims found dead inside the home. In 2008, Valerie filed a protection order from Conley after he threatened to break her legs and refused to let her leave their apartment, and then pushed her at a bus stop. She testified, "He was making accusations against me, telling me what I can wear, threatened to break my legs and put me in a wheelchair. He was making accusations saying that I was contacting my husband and saying that we were going to get back together." Conley pleaded guilty to disorderly conduct, but in 2012, Valerie requested that the protection order be dismissed, telling the court that she wanted to reconcile with Conley. Just the following year, Conley was charged with aggravated assault for threatening Valerie with a knife. The month before Valerie and her family were killed, Conley had pushed her head against a refrigerator multiple times after she attempted to stop him from disciplining her son with a belt. The case was still pending when he broke into the home and killed them all. Valerie had suffered for years at the hands of Conley, and the relationship was on and off. Over the course of these years, Valerie was also in an on and off again relationship with Dwayne Jackson, a longtime family friend. She went back and forth between the two men. Conley stated of the relationship, "I never tried to hold her back, but then she would always try and run off to be with him." Eventually, Valerie and Dwayne were married, and they went on to have 5 children together. Unfortunately, the relationship between Dwayne and Valerie wasn't much better, and Valerie found herself victim to another violent man. In May of 2006, a neighbour had reported Dwayne assaulting Valerie on their balcony. When police arrived, Dwayne said they were just arguing. Valerie said that Dwayne hadn't hit her, but that she was afraid of him. In 2009, Valerie accused Dwayne of punching her and accusing her of having an affair. Then in 2012, Dwayne was charged with holding Valerie and their children against their will for several days at a motel in Houston. When Valerie had attempted to leave, Dwayne hit her in the face several times. He also threatened to set the house on fire or shoot up the house if she left. The relationship between Valerie and Dwayne eventually broke down, and Valerie found her way back to Conley. She dedicated her love to her former husband by getting his name tattooed. As if history was repeating itself once more, Conley wasn't a changed man at all. The abuse only continued. For years, Valerie had been bouncing from violent man to violent man. The relationships often overlapped. When Valerie went back to Conley for one final time, Dwayne posted on Facebook, "The definition for insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Don't this make the 4th or 5th time of you two getting back together?" Valerie responded by posting on her own Facebook page, "Keep calm and love David." Her oldest daughter, who lived with her grandmother, and the only child to survive the massacre, replied, "You're obsessed. You need help, lol." All while this abuse was going on, the family were being investigated by Child Protective Services. There had been various reports dating back to 2011, but reasonable efforts had been made in the past to prevent the state from taking the children into care. There had been 4 separate complete investigations into the children's welfare. In December of 2011, GPS received a report of possible physical abuse of Caleb, Trinity, and Jonah. The case was ruled out with no significant factors found. In October of 2012, CPS received a report of possible physical abuse of Nathaniel, Dwayne, Jonah, Caleb, and Trinity. The case was ruled unable to be determined. That same month, the agency was contacted again about possible neglectful supervision with the same 5 children. In July of 2013, CPS received a report of possible neglectful supervision of Caleb. Neglect was ruled out by the agency. Back when Dwayne held Valerie and the children hostage at the motel, the agency was notified. CPS took depositions on that complaint, as well as complaints that Valerie would leave the children home alone multiple times. However, the agency caseworkers found that they were unable to determine the validity of these complaints and referred the family to family-based safety services in January of 2013. This division tries to help families that are in trouble and gets them to sign agreements to keep children safe and submit to any future monitoring by the agency. The family, which included both Conley and Dwayne, appeared to be amenable to working with the agency. But just 3 months later, Valerie contacted her CPS caseworker and informed her that she had called the police on Conley following the attack in which he cut her with a knife. 3 of the children in the family were reported by CPS to have what they described as special needs. Jonah had been diagnosed with a mild form of autism. Nathaniel had attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and was diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder. And Caleb had suffered brain damage, which resulted in him being developmentally delayed. In September of 2013, Child Protective Services finally took the children away from Valerie, Dwayne, and Conley. They had taken temporary custody of the children after an investigation had revealed a pattern of physical abuse and neglectful supervision. They had intervened after 7-year-old Caleb, who had developmental disabilities, had walked out of the home on 2 different occasions. On one occasion, he was found at 8:30 p.m. wandering near a busy intersection. In the affidavit petitioning a Houston court for the removal of the children, an agency caseworker had written, "The department believes that the children are in immediate danger." The following month, Valerie was able to get custody back of her children when the suit was dismissed. After Valerie got the children back, she and Conley were ordered to participate in counselling and random drug testing. That part of the case was dismissed in March of 2014, after they completed all court-ordered services. The agency did continue to conduct periodic visits and interviews with the children, but the case was then closed in May of 2014. Shortly before the murders, Valerie had called it quits on the relationship with Conley once more. The final straw had come when Conley attacked Valerie after she tried to stop him from flogging Nathaniel with a belt. Conley moved out of the home and into a local motel. Shortly thereafter, Dwayne moved back into the home with Valerie and the children, and the couple changed the locks. As these details came out in the media, the judge who had allowed the children to move back in with Valerie after they were removed from her care in 2013 defended his decision. Juvenile court judge Glenn Devlin said that he was never told that the children were in any immediate physical danger. He said that neither he or CPS could have prevented the massacre, based on the case that was presented to them in court. It was easy to see that life inside the home was turbulent. Despite the problems at home, the Jackson and Conley children were said to take everything in their stride. 13-year-old Nathaniel was a keen football player and an integral part of the North Harris County Bengals, which was a Pee-wee team. He was the protector of his siblings. 11-year-old Honesty was described as the responsible mother hen of the family, with a wicked sense of humour and an obsession with flaming hot Cheetos. 10-year-old Dwayne was the goofy one of the family, and always full of jokes. 9-year-old Caleb enjoyed spending time on his computer and loved to watch YouTube videos. 7-year-old Trinity loved nothing more than getting her nails and hair done, and she loved the colour pink. As for 6-year-old Jonah, he was always so full of hugs and kisses for the family. Valerie tried her hardest to protect her children, and on Facebook she did come across as a doting mother. In July, she posted a birthday celebration for Jonah. She wrote, "Thank you for bringing so much joy to my life. I feel blessed daily that I get to be your mama." As details of the domestic abuse and domestic violence were reported in the media, a lot of people blamed Valerie for not doing more to protect her children. Unfortunately, when a woman tries to leave a violent man, that's when they face the greatest danger. Her story was an extreme case of domestic violence entrapment because she had yo-yoed back and forth between two violent men. Upon Conley's arrest, he made a full and detailed confession to the brutal murders in an interview with two homicide detectives. He said that one morning, he had driven over to Valerie's home. By this point, he and Valerie had broken up and Dwayne had moved back into the home. However, Conley believed that he should still be allowed to stay at the home in one of the rooms. As he said, he still paid rent. Conley drove over to the home and discovered that the locks had been changed and found that Dwayne was now living in the home. An intense rage built up inside of Conley. He left the home and began to plot. He later returned to the home and entered through an unlocked window. He was carrying a bag which contained 6 pairs of handcuffs, a handgun, duct tape, and 3 magazines of ammunition. Since Conley was a convicted felon, under federal law he was prohibited from buying and possessing firearms. However, he had exploited the private sale loophole, which enables criminals and other people who are prohibited from owning weapons to get their hands on guns by turning to unlicensed gun sales and bypassing the criminal background check. He had purchased the weapon 2 weeks earlier. Conley explained how he first of all handcuffed Dwayne on the floor in the master bedroom. He brought all of the children and Valerie into the bedroom. They watched on in horror as Conley shot Dwayne dead. He then handcuffed Valerie on the bed as the children ran into the bathroom and cowered in the small room. Conley followed them close behind. He shot 2 of the children dead and handcuffed the rest of the petrified children to their bunk beds. Conley then shot Nathaniel, his own son. He commented, "I shot him because he was disrespectful and he was growing up to be just like Dwayne Jackson." Nathaniel had asked his father if he could be shot in the head, knowing that this would be the quickest method of murder. Conley said that he obliged. Conley had been inside the family's home for 14 hours, systematically killing the family. During those 14 hours, he completely terrorized the family, essentially forcing them to watch as each person was killed, knowing that they were going to be next. He revealed that Valerie and the girls, Honesty and Trinity, were still alive up until the moment the door was kicked in by the responding officers. He said that he had planned on killing himself after killing the 3 final victims, but ultimately he decided to surrender instead. For hours, Valerie, Honesty and Trinity were handcuffed and surrounded in the lifeless bodies of the other children. The trauma and fear that they must have felt doesn't even bear thinking about. After making the confession, Conley permitted an interview from behind bars with CBS 11 KHOU. While he had just murdered 8 people, including his own son, he came across as calm, and the reporter even described him as poised and polite. He repeatedly said, "I'm only human." He said that when he discovered that Dwayne had moved back in with Valerie, he was in shock and felt fed up. He then added that his son Nathaniel was a problem child. He described his deceased son as disrespectful and said that Valerie wouldn't let him discipline him. He then chillingly commented, "Thou shalt honour your mother and father, or your days are short." Conley would then speak with other news outlets. He claimed that he loved his son, but believed that the children were all growing up to be monsters. He shared his belief that the children were not being raised properly and were acting unkindly towards other people. He said to KPRC TV, "They were growing up to be monsters. They were disrespectful, rude in school. I'm not saying they're dead because of that. I'm not even saying I killed them. God says in the Bible, do not disrespect your mother or father, or your days will be short. But I'm not saying that's what happened." He then accused Valerie of feeding the children spoiled food and lamented the fact that she refused to let him punish the children. He questioned whether Nathaniel was actually his son as well, stating that he'd wanted to get a paternity test, but Valerie had never allowed him. He commented, "I loved him like my own son. I wouldn't turn my back on him, but he had a discipline problem." He went on to speak about his checkered past, claiming that the previous charges of domestic violence against him were all lies. And then he referred to Dwayne as a monster who had harassed him. It was kind of an ironic statement, as he now stood accused and admitted to killing Valerie and her entire family, including his own son. Based on his own statements, it was abundantly clear that Conley feared the disrespect of his own children, and he responded to perceived disrespect with abuse and murder. The street where the family lived would typically be abuzz with the sound of children playing, but the mood was somber in the aftermath of the massacre. The Jackson children were frequent faces in the neighbourhood, where they liked to play amongst themselves and with the neighbourhood children. Kathy Sisomkim said to CBD, "They would play ball over here. They were all good kids." As a way to try and cope with the tragedy, neighbours and strangers alike began to form a memorial outside the family's home. Within 24 hours, the garden was flooded with candles, stuffed animals, flowers and trinkets. The memorial stood beside some toys that the children were playing with just days earlier. A chilling reminder of just how fragile life can be. Kathy's son Jalen was good friends with Valerie and Conley's son Nathaniel. She recalled that Nathaniel would sometimes find solace in their home. He often showed up in floods of tears and confided that his father had tried to beat him. Kathy commented, "I don't know why it got so bad. I cannot believe it." Much of the neighbourhood was aware of the problems within the family. Some of the children spoke open about it. One night, Carlos Sanchez, who lived across the street, saw Nathaniel outside after dark. Carlos asked Nathaniel what he was doing, and he said that he was running away. Carlos walked Nathaniel back to his home, and Conley opened the door. He recollected that Conley didn't say a word to him. He just stared directly at him while Nathaniel went inside. He commented, Conley was already in a different world. Other neighbours recollected how the younger children would be allowed to play outside alone. Well, it was common to see children playing in the neighbourhood, not ones as young as the youngest Jackson children. Carlos commented, the little one, Jonah, he used to be on the street by himself with the other kids, cars driving by and everything, and no adult supervision. The families of Dwayne and Valerie would release statements. Dwayne's sister, Darlene Benton, said that she wanted her brother to be remembered as an incredible man who was fun-loving and provided for his family. She stated, "We want the world to know he loved God. He loved his wife. He loved his children. He loved his family." Dwayne's family would state in the media that Dwayne had been protecting Valerie and the children from Conley. His brother Eric stated, "He loved his children dearly. They meant the world to him. They adored their father and they knew that he loved them. Even Nathaniel considered him to be his real father. It was really because Dwayne was just gentle when it came to the children." As the investigation was underway, questions were raised regarding how the Harris County Sheriff's Office and their response to the text message Valerie had sent her mother. She had made it clear that she was being held hostage at gunpoint at her home. The Harris County Sheriff's Office had arrived at the home quite early, and Conley had admitted to being in the home for 14 hours. Many people wondered whether the family could have been saved if they broke down the front door the first time they visited the family's home. The question remained as to whether the department had been given accurate information from the 911 dispatcher. And if so, why didn't they respond to the call appropriately for a possible armed intruder? Obviously, to gain entry to a home, law enforcement does need a search warrant from a magistrate to show they have probable cause to think a crime has occurred or is occurring inside the home. However, in certain circumstances, they are relieved of this duty to get a warrant. Somebody being held hostage at gunpoint would have fallen under those certain circumstances. As it would be discovered, Valerie and the children were still alive inside the home when officers first responded. After the officers left, Valerie had desperately sought out help. She had sent text messages to several people in her family. In the wake of the murders, loved ones of the Jackson family set up a GoFundMe to help with the cost of the funeral. The service was held at the La Crescent United Methodist Church on the 20th of August. Mourners gathered outside as a procession of hearses rolled up to the church. Dozens of relatives, friends, teachers and classmates converged at the church as 8 white coffins were wheeled in. There was a bittersweet tone at the service as the mourners shared some of their fondest memories of the family. At the request of the family, 30 members of the Wisconsin and Minnesota chapters of Bikers Against Child Abuse stood guard at the edge of the church. The organisation uses compassion to empower children. Outside, Paulette Jackson, Dwayne's sister, said to the media, While I'm sure they're in a better place with the Lord, this is difficult for both families to accept. The money raised in the GoFundMe also helped to pay for Valerie and the children's bodies to be flown to Minnesota and then driven to La Crosse, Wisconsin to be buried. That was where Valerie and Conley's daughter, Natalie, who was the only surviving child of the massacre, lived. By October of 2021, it was announced that the prosecution were not seeking the death penalty against Conley. Following Conley's arrest, he had been undergoing psychological testing. This testing found that he had an intellectual disability. And as per Supreme Court rulings, those with intellectual disabilities could not be executed. The trial began on the 5th of October. There wasn't going to be any debate as to whether Conley had killed the family or not. He had made a full confession, after all. During opening statements, the prosecutor put forward their theory that Conley had been motivated to carry out the gruesome murders simply because he wanted to emotionally torture Valerie.
David Conley then proceeds to walk through the house and one by one shoots and kills all 6 of Valerie's. And then finally, David Conley shoots and kills Valerie Jackson, putting an end to what I imagine was the most terrifying and horrific last hours of her life.
The full confession of Conley was played aloud for the jury to hear, and ultimately, it sealed his fate. After deliberating for just around 1 hour, the jury returned with a verdict and found David Conley guilty of the murders of Valerie and Dwayne. He had been charged with the murders of the children as well, but it was decided that he would not be tried for their murders. Victim impact statements were presented. Loved ones of the family packed the wooden benches in the courtroom. A lot of them had flown in from the Midwest. The courtroom fell silent as Valerie and Conley's daughter, Natalie, stood before the microphone. She stated, "Each individual member of my family was someone and didn't get the chance to become who they would be." She said that she would never truly understand what the family went through during those 14 hours that they were being held hostage by Conley. Paulette, Dwayne's sister, stated that she had not slept peacefully in the past 6 years. She said that out of nowhere, tears sometimes streamed down her face. She often found herself staring at children who resembled her nieces and nephews. She then stared directly at Conley and said, "You're the monster. Only a monster could kill, could choose to kill." Dwayne's mother, Shirley Jackson, said she couldn't fathom how somebody could shoot an innocent child, and said that Dwayne had wanted to be a good husband and a good father. David Conley was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. David Conley had a pattern of domestic abuse, one that followed a path that often leads to jail, hospital, or death. For years he had been tormenting Valerie Jackson and her children, and had shown just what he was capable of in terms of violence. Eventually, Valerie left Conley, and this time, she said that it was for good. In a final act of defiance, Conley took the ultimate step to show